let me explain to you the difference between this book and this one. I thought this would be a really interesting comparison to make because both of these stories are at their core stories about love, both platonic and romantic. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow is I have to count on my fingers. Tomorrow and Tomorrow. Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow follows the stories of Sam, Sadie, and Marx, who were three friends who found a gaming company together. The Three Musketeers, on the other hand, follows the story of D'Artagnan, a young man who sets out to France in order to make his fortune and ends up meeting the Three Musketeers. And he becomes very fast friends with them and eventually joins the Musketeers himself. Now, in my reading journal, what I wrote is that this book is definitely evidence that Gabrielle Zevin is a good writer in a technical sense. The vocabulary was lovely, the plot was pretty ironclad, the premise was incredibly interesting in its uniqueness, and the story overall, it flowed pretty nicely. So technically speaking, it accomplishes about 95% of what Alexandre Dumas and his ghostwriter accomplished in The Three Musketeers. But where I think these two books come into conflict is in their writing of their main characters. Both of the main characters are fundamentally flawed. Sam is selfish, apathetic, a bad communicator, and at times pretty unreasonable. D'Artagnan, on the other hand, is also selfish, but also manipulative, impetuous, and at times he is bloodthirsty, but that's pretty hard to consider a character flaw because, again, he is a musketeer. But my issue with Sam is that he's an incredibly unlikable main character. No matter how many times the author tries to explain to you his thought processes and the motives behind his actions, it's impossible to sympathize with him. I need to get the books. I forgot to get the books. There is a conversation that happens towards the end of the book that really explains to me the essence of why Sam is such an unlikable person. Mind you, when this conversation happens, it's only been a couple of months since Marx's death, because Sadie finds out that she's pregnant a couple of months before Marx dies. And when this conversation happens, Sadie is still pregnant, which means that it could not have been more than a couple of months, maybe even weeks after Mark said. I don't know, Sam's capable of anything, honestly speaking. But this is a conversation that Sam has with Sadie, possibly a couple of weeks to a couple of months after her partner, whose child she's pregnant with, has just died. Okay? I need you to keep that in mind when I read this. Sadie pulled her hands into the arms of her sweater. Why? Sadie said. Why do we have to do any of this? For God's sake, because it's our company. Sam stood up and he almost thought he would collapse, the ghost foot beating like a heart. But instead of sitting down or mentioning the discomfort he was in, he let the pain and lack of sleep power his rage. I'm so tired of you. Do you honestly think you suffer more than everyone else? Do you think you suffer more than I do? Do you think you're the first person ever to have a baby? Or lose someone? Do you think you're some pioneer when it comes to grief? Sadie shifted forwards and he could feel the momentum of their argument. He could feel the cruel thing she was about to say in response to the cruel thing he had said. But the cruel thing did not arrive. Disturbingly, she slumped forward and started to weep. He watched her, but he did not go over to her. Snap out of it, Sadie. Come to the office. We work through our pain. That's what we do. We put the pain into the work and the work becomes better, but you have to participate. You have to talk to me. You can't ignore me and our company and everything that came before. Everything isn't over just because Marx is dead. And then Sadie says, I can't go back there, Sam. Sam replies, then you're weaker than I thought. The sun was going down and the air had turned abruptly cold in the way LA beach towns can. In truth, she said in a low voice, you've always made too much of me. Sam walked towards the door. Come in, don't come in. I don't care how you do it. Just get the work done on Revels. It's your game. You wanted to make it so much that you were willing to end our relationship if you can remember anything that happened before last December. You owe it to me, to Marx, to yourself. You owe it to the game, Sadie. Sam, she called as he reached the door. Please don't ever come here again. I know people are going to make the argument that this is evidence that Sam is a flawed main character. This is not evidence of a flawed main character. This is evidence of an unlikable, irritating, an unempathetic main character. Those are two very different things. Now, there's always been the conversation of, does the main character have to be likable in order to be interesting to the reader? I personally don't believe they do. Take, for example, The Stranger by Albert Camus. Okay, I say Camus, it's supposed to be Albert Camus. Uh, do with that information what you will. The main character, Mersault, in The Stranger is incredibly unlikable, right? He's infuriating to read about, but that doesn't take away from the story because the story doesn't necessarily depend on Mersault. So what I was trying to say here is that the outsider doesn't really depend on Mersault being a likable person in order to make its point. You being unable to understand his apathy towards the world is what is supposed to draw you in, because what is supposed to interest you is the question of how can someone possibly live life like this. However, tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow relies on you liking the characters and caring about what happens to them in order to keep you invested in the story. If you don't, there's nothing else in the story to draw you in. But when it comes to Sam, or for that matter Sadie and Marks, I could not care less what happened to these people. I am so sorry. Like, I mean, and this is like a major, major spoiler alert. So if you haven't read the book yet and you want to read it, this is your warning. Max gets shot, right? And he dies. And I just could not be bothered to force myself to read Gabrielle Zevin's like surface level exploration of grief. I know a lot of my extracts are being taken post Marx's death, but I'll explain later in the video why I feel like Marx's death was such a turning point for me in realizing just how poorly written this book was. So that's probably why a lot of the extracts that I picked out were post that event. But yeah, so this is a conversation that Sam and Sadie have after Marx's death. In Sam's pocket, the buzz of his cell phone. It was Sadie, and her voice was tight and small. Are you there now? Is it awful? It's not so bad. Describe it, she said. There's not much to say. You have to be honest. I don't want to be surprised. It's still the office. They mainly messed up my office. I'll never be able to get that Ichigo piggy bank back together. There's some damage to the floor, and there's a hole in the pillar. Sadie didn't say anything for a beat. Damage is obfuscation. What does damage mean? It's blood, Sam said. It seeped into the concrete. How big is the stain? I don't know. The largest section is a couple of feet in circumference. There's a spot several feet wide where Marks bled to death, you mean? Yeah, I guess so. Sam felt existentially tired. A contrary part of him wanted to insist that Marks hadn't bled to death on that floor. He had died in a hospital 10 weeks later. But Sam was too tired for semantics. I spoke to a flooring contractor. It can be refinished. Maybe I don't want it to be clean, Sadie said. You mean you want me to leave it? No, but it shouldn't be erased, Sadie said. Marks shouldn't just be erased. Come on, Sadie, that stain isn't Marks. It's... She interrupted him. The place where he died. It's the place where he was murdered. I think it'll be hard for people to work around a large bloodstain. Yes, it will be hard. How about a great vintage rug, then? Max loved Killam rugs. That isn't even a little funny. I'm sorry, it isn't funny. I'm tired. Seriously, Sadie, do you not want people to return to work? I don't know. Do you want to come and look at it? He said hopefully. We can decide what to do together. I can pick you up. No, I do not want to look at it, Sam. I do not want to look at it. What is wrong with you? Okay. Just take care, she said. That's what I'm trying to do, Sadie. Now, I was going to write about how, in contrast, Duma writes about D'Artagnan's reaction to when Constance gets poisoned and dies. But that scene has a lot going on at once, and it extends over multiple chapters. And I don't want to make you sit through my entire reading of that, but I would highly, highly, highly encourage you go read The Three Musketeers for yourself, because Dumas does such an excellent job of building up to this woman and investing you in D'Artagnan and Constance's relationship that I read this entire section through tears. But I do still want to draw the comparison here. D'Artagnan and Constance have maybe 3 short interactions, leading up to the point in the book where she gets murdered. They don't interact much at all. And yet, I feel like I was so much more invested in their relationship than I was in Sam and Sadie's, who, in my opinion, interact too much in this book. Both Dumas and Zevin are trying to create this atmosphere of longing and yearning. But an atmosphere of longing and yearning can only really be created if there is a genuine reason for these two to be separated, right? Which is what Dumas does extremely well. There is genuine reason for D'Artagnan and Constance being separated. Constance works as what I can best describe as an undercover agent for the queen, and she ends up getting kidnapped and she's forced to like hide in a convent in order to protect her own life. Yet she risks everything for D'Artagnan. One of the three interactions I mentioned before was literally this, right? Constance knows she's getting sent into a convent to protect herself, and so she manages to smuggle a letter to D'Artagnan. In the letter, she asks him to wait on this secluded road that is on the way to the convent where she's going. And they manage to touch fingertips for literally a second while she drives by. That's it. That's the whole interaction. And yet, D'Artagnan is like filled with ecstasy. But then we come back to Sam and Sadie, and there is literally nothing keeping them apart except Sam's insecurities about himself. And as much as I understand that one person's insecurity can be the cause of a relationship not coming into fruition, this is not a high stakes separation. In fact, I would argue this probably makes Sam even more unlikable as a person, because he says he's so in love with Sadie, right? That he gets very angry and bitter and depressed when she starts dating Marx. But what I found interesting was that he was a lot, and I mean a lot less concerned and angry and bitter and depressed when she was dating Dove, who was incredibly abusive towards Sadie. And I feel like he was less angry and bitter and depressed because he knew she was unhappy with Dove, but he couldn't stand the idea that she was happy with Marx. He is genuinely the worst kind of person. So it's hard for me to root for or even want Sam's relationship with Sadie to work out, because he is, honestly speaking, on the same level as Dove. It's just that Sam is emotionally abusive, whereas Dove is physically abusive. That's the only difference. Like, I don't want Sadie to end up with Sam any more than I wanted Sadie to be with Dove. She brings up all of these like really raw, really personal, really impactful topics, and then she just does not explore them in depth. I'm sorry, I need to interject here. If you've been listening with headphones or just your volume really high, every now and then you might hear a thump and a squeak in the background. Where I live, there's a lot of coconut trees around my house, and so those noises that you're hearing are actually just the coconut tree branches hitting, like, we have like a metal sheet roof, so that's the noise you're hearing. And I really did try my best to fix it in post, but I apologize in advance. Like, for example, with Marx, Sadie, who is married to him, goes into depression. Okay, that makes sense, right? That's that's like a stage of grief. I understand that she was depressed. And basically what happens is she stops working on the game, on the expansion pack for a game that that they had a deadline to release on, and that's understandable. And I was excited for this because I was like, okay, this is actually like an interesting conflict that I want to see how they solve this, right? They don't solve it. Sadie, no explanations given, just finishes it. We don't know how this change happened or why this change happened, and we just take it and we move on. I mean, to be fair, we do get the argument that I mentioned before, where Sam tells her to get it together, but a conversation is not an exploration of grief. We don't actually get to read about Sadie's grief. We're just expected to discard it the way she discards it. And for that matter, we don't get an exploration of Sam's grief either. All we get from Sam are a few flashbacks and complaints that he has to fix everything in his office and take over everything that Marx used to do. Sam does nothing except complain, by the way. This entire book, he does nothing except complain and complain and complain and complain and complain. So my question then is, why was Marx killed off at all? Because to me, if you're going to kill off a character in a story, it goes without saying that you explore what kind of impact it has on the surviving characters. And here's my theory. I feel like Gabrielle Zevin originally just planned to use Marx and Sadie's relationship as a way to create a new point of conflict between Sadie and Sam in order to further develop their relationship. I say this because this happened several times throughout the book, where every time she seems to hit a roadblock when it comes to the development of Sam and Sadie's relationship, she just introduces a new point of conflict, a new argument, just some misunderstanding. Because Sam and Sadie have such less chemistry together that there's really no room for their relationship to grow organically. But my theory is that she used this relationship between Sam and Sadie, since Marx is written to be like this perfect character who can do no wrong. I think she hit a point where she knew she needed to get rid of Marx solely to give Sam and Sadie some character development, but she didn't know how to do it without killing him off. And so she does. But then she doesn't even give Sam or Sadie the character development that she was aiming for. They both remain the same insufferable characters. And so what ends up happening is Marx's death becomes pointless. We get no character development for Sam or Sadie. And we are forced to read the surface level exploration of grief for two characters that Gabrielle Zevin clearly did not want to write. And all of this could have, I cannot stress this enough, all of this could have been avoided if Sadie and Marx just did not get together in the first place. Because even that feels forced. Sadie goes from being extremely apathetic towards Marx to suddenly saying random things like, "You're so easy to love." What are you talking about? But anyway, I digress. That's just my theory. At one point, it's even mentioned that Sadie had had an abortion at some point. We don't explore this. It's just mentioned in passing once. Just once. I am being so dead serious. But on a calmer note, let's come back to the Three Musketeers. The exploration of each and every emotion throughout this book is so rich and it's so deep and it's so impactful. Take, for example, when D'Artagnan and Lord Buckingham are talking about the women that they're in love with. They're passionate, they're unembarrassed, they're almost wild in the words they use and how they talk. Take Milady de Winter, who is, in my opinion, one of the best villains who has ever been written. And she is incredibly bitter and evil to like the very depths of her soul. It's deeply uncomfortable to read her point of view because Dumas explores every single inch of just how evil and mean and spiteful she is. Her manipulation of John Felton towards the end of the book is almost nauseating to read. I'm popping back in to say that I do talk about very specifically Milady's manipulation of John Felton here. That manipulation extends over about 5-6 chapters, and it's extremely uncomfortable to read. In fact, when I read it, it took me about 3 days just to get through those 6 chapters, and they're very short chapters. They were like at most like 5 to 6 pages long, and it took me like 3 days to get through like all 6 chapters. So I'm not going to read it because again it is a very long passage and I know you don't want to sit through that, but if you get the chance, definitely pick up the Three Musketeers. By the way, Zevin also has a sort of anti-hero character in her book. He is supposed to be portrayed as a sort of selfish and insufferable and abusive person. Something about him is just so cartoonish. I'm so sorry, I really could not take him seriously at all throughout this book. It was so hard for me to view him as a threat to anybody in this novel. All I know about this man is that he's Jewish and annoying. Neither of those things is caused by the other, by the way. That's just literally like all you will know about him at the end of tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow. Something else that I didn't include in my original script for this video was how I found it extremely difficult to get invested in Sam and Sadie's relationship. I didn't want to talk about it originally because I couldn't really put my finger on why. And I don't like giving criticism purely just based off vibes. But I was skimming through the reviews and I noticed someone had pretty much hit the nail on the head when it came to why Sam and Sadie's relationship feels so flat. This is a review by Thomas, who seems to be a Goodreads celebrity. I didn't even know you could have this many followers on Goodreads, but he does. So big ups to him. But this was part of his review that I think again hits the nail on the head for why Sam and Sadie are so unbelievable. I think my biggest critique of this book centers on Sam and Sadie's friendship. I will couch this commentary by saying I read a lot of literary fiction, and it's one of my favorite genres, so my expectations were reasonably high. I found their friendship engaging, though at the same time, I don't think Zevin developed the foundation of their friendship enough to merit all of the conflict and turmoil that they experienced. For example, Sam constantly idealizes Sadie throughout the book and is all, I love Sadie Green even though I can't tell her. And I was like, why? Like, I get that they had a somewhat intense bonding experience as kids and that they made video games together, but I literally had no clue why Sam actually loved Sadie. She treats him pretty horribly throughout the book, as he does to her at times. I get that friends can treat each other poorly, though I struggle to believe Sam and Sadie's bond, given that they get into these intense arguments all the time and then resolve them by forgetting and forgiving instead of communicating through the conflict and processing what actually happened. I don't know, maybe my best friendships are so healthy to the point where it feels a bit incomprehensible to me. And then he shouts out his best friend, who's also on Goodreads. This comes back to my criticism of the fact that you cannot possibly like these characters. And if you do not like these characters, there's nothing else in the story to draw you in. Ultimately, what I'm saying is, unfortunately, there's nothing impressive about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, or even memorable. Again, outside of a technical sense, it is a story. And like that's about it. My issue with that is that I feel like a book can be imperfectly written but still have incredibly compelling characters and a good exploration of its subject material. Take for example James by Percival Everett. I was sort of critical about that book because I felt like the writing felt really rushed and the flow of the book was just sort of jarring every now and then. But where I feel like Percival Everett uh, excelled as an author was in his character writing. James and Huck are both incredibly compelling characters. And I could feel the genuine depths of their emotions and their conflicts throughout the story, which just felt like it was missing in Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow for a book that is so filled with conflict, that is so filled with emotional ups and emotional downs. I could not feel a single one of those ups or downs. You know what I mean? I also do want to mention, I found it really interesting that if you look at the cover of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, you can go look it up, or actually, I'll just show the camera right here. There's a quote by an author named Zadie Smith. I read a book by her a while ago, um, and I picked it up at a secondhand shop, which is why it's in this condition. I found it interesting that she had a quote by Zadie Smith on the cover of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow because I felt very similarly about the Autograph Man that I did about Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow. The Autograph Man also has an incredibly interesting and unique premise. It follows the story of a 28-year-old, sorry, I have to read this out, a 28-year-old Anglo-Chinese Jewish man living in a fictional suburb of London called Mountjoy, who, and I didn't even know this was a real job, collects autographs for a living. Well, I mean, he collects other things too. I guess that sort of makes him an antiques dealer or a collectibles dealer, which is a job I knew existed. Either way, Alex, the main character of The Autograph Man, is just like Sam. He is supposed to be a flawed main character. He is a serial drug abuser, he's alcoholic, he's a terrible friend, he's a terrible partner as well, to the point where he leaves his partner on the day she has open heart surgery to go meet a Hollywood celebrity that he has been obsessed with his whole life. So, you know, that's what I mean by he's meant to be an unlikable character. Even with this unique, very interesting premise, the book just falls flat about a third of the way into reading it. And you don't have to take just my word for it. James Wood, a fairly famous literary critic who also writes for the New Yorker, had criticism about this novel very similar to my criticism of Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, is in that he felt like certain sentences displayed brilliance, but these weren't enough to save the novel, which he felt was filled with cute digest headings, silly epigraphs, informational interpolations, and probably the most damning of all, in my opinion, a vacant main character who Zadie Smith liked far more than any of her readers did. See, The Autograph Man is again evidence that Zadie Smith is a good writer in a technical sense, but not much else. That's about as much as I think I can compare these two books. I think some grace has to be afforded in that these two come from vastly different genres of literature. The Three Musketeers comes under the genre of swashbuckler novels, which I didn't even know was a genre, but swashbuckler novels, which are designed to make you root for the main character, the hero, no matter how terrible of a person they are, which in this case is D'Artagnan. Meanwhile, Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow comes under the broader genre that we're seeing a sort of, in my opinion, what's the word? Oversaturation of right now. But I still feel like a difference in genre shouldn't affect the quality of the novel. Overall, I think Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow can be a successful study in good writing, but not in impactful writing. It is totally fine to emphasize things like good writing, good sentence structure, rich vocabulary. There's nothing wrong with these things. Both The Autograph Man and Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow have won their fair share of awards. But for a story to have a legacy and endurance in the long term, this by itself is not enough. A truly great novel will combine both excellent technical writing and a story that is emotionally impactful, a story that makes you feel something. This is also why I compare this book to The Three Musketeers, because Dumas does this incredibly well. I think what Gabrielle Zevin would have really benefited from was exploring who Sam and Sadie are as individuals outside of each other. Not through flashbacks, not through their games, but who they are as people in the present. Give them little interactions with people who are not central to the story. Like, let Sam see, for example, a couple on a date in a coffee shop and tell me what he thinks about that. Let him run into a college friend who is in Marks. Tell me his thoughts about a game that he's currently playing. And it's the same with Sadie. Let me explore who she is as a person outside of all the people she's in relationships with, because I don't know who she is outside of that. Let her sit on a balcony and lose control of her thoughts. Let me see her thought processes when she's spiraling, because Zevin repeatedly classifies Sadie as an anxious overthinker, but I don't ever get to see that. But that's all I had to say. Sorry if this video had a lot of switches in between. I did film this section, these sections where I'm in the bright purple pink light. I did film this about like 5 days after the other original sections. I hope this video was at least a little bit informative. I know it is a little all over the place, but that's really just how my brain works. If you did enjoy this, I would highly recommend you go read The Three Musketeers. I wouldn't recommend Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow as much, but The Three Musketeers, incredible book. Definitely go read it. Happy reading!